If you want to first introduce yourself, I usually don't do that, but I do. I would love for you to introduce yourself a little bit, and then Mexico talks and kind of what you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Quinton. As you know, live in Mexico. I live in a city central west of Mexico called Guadalajara in the state of Jalisco. I'm originally from Monterrey. Monterrey, it's a big city northeast of the country, about 2.5, 3 hour drive from the U.S.-Mexico border. Both cities jointly with Mexico City are the three biggest cities in the country. Guadalajara has been my home for the past 10 years or so. And I came here for business mainly. And I like the city, though. I like it very, very much. It has an excellent weather. It's close to the beach. People are awesome. This is still, even though it's a big city, you still find sparks of a small town in the within the city. So it's a great city to live. Um, and I mainly focus myself on real estate and a little bit more in depth into the industrial real estate market. So I don't do housing, I don't do commercial, I do a little bit of office corporate space, but mainly when my clients require it. But I focus probably 95% of my production is on the industrial real estate. And also, I'm pretty active in social media, and I recently opened a podcast. I host a podcast uh, called Mexico Talks, where I speak to people uh, that are involved in real estate or business within the country or that influence anything that is around business in Mexico. And it's been a short time since we started the podcast. It's only been 12 episodes up to now. I have a first goal to get to 21 episodes. Um, as you know, there's probably 1% of the podcasts in the world that reach that mark of the 21 episodes. So that's going to be a first goal, and it's going well. It's going very well. So at least people are starting to recognize, or the industry, the market is starting to recognize Mexico Talks as a good reference.
Being in Japan for 10 years, I've seen the changes, and um, I want to respect privacy. So, I've met and known some very, very large industrial businessmen here in Asia. And some of their contracts that they have worked with since the 90s, the names. They're some of the biggest companies in the world, and they've been, doing manufacturing for them for a long time. And over the last several years, independent from all media, I was seeing these businessmen talk about the rise in wages in China. And they're like, we have to go out. So now they're opening factories in India. They're opening factories in Indonesia. They just opened one this year in Indonesia, actually. And I saw this progression. But that's in Asia, right? So when I'm in stateside and I'm working, I'm seeing the same kind of thing happen here on the Western hemispheres with Latin America, which made me extremely fascinated, especially because you do industrial. You have boots on the ground, right? You have an inside perspective of the manufacturing moving in there and industry itself moving in there. Not just people tired of American chaos, but also industries and businesses. So what are you seeing in terms of business startups, but also maybe, manufacturing coming down into the Mexico area?
The short answer is yes. Um, I actually do see a huge opportunity in Mexico for that reason. You probably heard about the famous nearshoring concept that is probably that it's happening, even though there's some detractors saying that we're not getting as much as we could. That's always there's always going to be noise around this kind of topics. The truth is, Mexico's been part of a nearshoring phenomenon for several decades, for many years, and so it has been increasing in the past few years, mainly because of what's going on between China and the U.S. So you probably want to think a little bit further back in time, and you see, China has always been a mystery and something that has attracted the attention of the whole world because of the nature of its size, the size of its population, etc. So many years ago, companies mostly based out of the US, companies that everybody knows, companies that like that are pretty much involved in big box stores and that are spread out through the US and now in some other countries. They started to realize that they could get a big chunk of the market by manufacturing in a different location that could be cost competitive, and they found China. But that wasn't an easy task as China wasn't part of the big club of of commerce that the US and other countries were part of. So that was the first step, getting China into that big club so that China would be accepted as part of that big commercial experience throughout the world, I'm sorry. So when that happened, these companies started establishing manufacturing facilities in China for the only purpose of getting those products into the US at a lower, much lower cost, and eventually, winning big chunks of each market. During that same time, other areas in Asia started, also lifting their hands and saying we can also be part of that. And countries like Japan, as you know, I mean, there's been many years in which Japan has been focusing on quality, and many of the most important quality processes that are right now adopted throughout the world were created in Japan. The automotive industry, Toyota was probably one of the main players on that process. So all that was going on while Mexico was starting to really participate on this whole game called commerce in the world, by getting into an agreement with the U.S. and Canada, originally called Telecan in Mexico or NAFTA in the U.S., North American Free Trade Agreement. That was probably the best thing that Mexico could have done in its whole history. What that what that created was a big player in which U.S., Canada, and of course Mexico could start a process of industrialization of the whole territory, mainly Mexico, because we were not as industrialized. We did have a lot of industry, but we did not were as industrialized as we are right now. So, long story short, right now we are very well positioned as a big player in this arena, and then Trump happens. and he decides he want to start a war, a commercial war with China. And well, companies started looking somewhere else because they realized that this was not going to go down, it was going to escalate, as it is still going right now. So you see, and then the company started looking towards this side of the world, and then we got to COVID, which made it even worse. Supply chains started suffering. Freight charges started skyrocketing, and the perfect storm started happening throughout the world. In China, in the world started asking itself, how can we all depend on one single country, which is China? Let me give you a fact. There's probably a little over 35 trillion US dollars of sunk cost establishing factories in China. If the US, which is the biggest market in the world, wants to have the end products in general as they know it right now, a lot of that infrastructure has to come closer to this side of the world. Now, 35 trillion, it's a lot of factories. I mean, we can't, there's no single country that can, attract all of that investment. Mexico for sure can't, for several reasons. China has 1.3 billion Chinese people living in China. Mexico has 130 million people living in Mexico. So we're around 10% of their population. Even if we had the infrastructure, even if we had, even if our legal frame and everything was perfect in Mexico, which is not, we don't have the capacity to absorb all of that business. But if we are able to attract 1% of that volume, 1%, that means $350 billion of investment. So, going back to your question, that means a huge opportunity for Mexico and for other investors that wish to get into a real chance of investment opportunity. So there's a lot of things going on around this. I mean, we can get into that if you want to, but right now, answering your question, there is a real opportunity. I would say, in the last number I got, the last fact I got was that there were close to 400 companies, most of them Asian, already established in Mexico between 2022 and 2024.
One thing Sean and I talked about was the foreign investment projections going into Mexico. That's kind of what you had mentioned here. He was saying the estimates for the end of this year are close to 100 billion already. So if 1% is 350 billion, I mean, you're already 30% there, right? Or whatever, 25% there.
I'm not sure there's 100 billion. I mean, I wish we had 100 billion investment in Mexico. Probably that number involves several years, because I don't think we've attracted that much of investment as a country. And the 1% that I'm talking about is,
I think he was saying
the 1% that I'm talking about is, it's only the investment that it's already established in China and that could come to the side of the world. There's other kind of investments that may come to Mexico from different parts of the world. Now, the reason I'm saying that there's no there's not an investment of $100 billion in the country yet. It's because that is, I mean, having the recent the recent elections we had, and the animosity that we have in the country between several parties and the political situation, that amount of investment would have made a huge difference um, in the current situation of the country, of the government, and in the political situation. So, and I'm really close to that kind of investment. So I would say no. We're going to probably hit close to 40 billion this year of new investment here in the country.
That's actually, just to clarify, the 100
Yeah.
billion was a projection by
Yeah.
the end of this year. That was the data projection, and then actually Sean actually said the actual number is closer to 40 billion as well. Current, but it's going up very, very fast.
Yeah.
Something that Sean brought up to me was the transcontinental train system that they're building in Mexico. Do you know about that, or have any information about that?
Yes.
Please tell me about that.
There's a bunch of projects being done as we speak. Um, the reason or the justification for those projects is good, is correct. The process of those projects is not the best one, and what is going to happen at the end, I would still question it a little bit. So trains have not been supported in Mexico for a long time, except for cargo trains. Okay, so there is a good network of trains being used mainly for cargo that has been used for many years. Passenger trains were left out many years ago because they were losing money. Most of the trains of the world lose money. I don't want to say all of them, but most of them are subsidized. And if you're a rich country like Japan, you can give yourself that luxury. Mexico, even though it's the 12th economy in the world, I don't think we are a rich country in resources, but we're not a rich country in order to lose money. So the intention of rehabilitating passenger trains in Mexico, it's good because it's supposed to be a good way of transport for most of the population. Now, if you want to use that same infrastructure for cargo, which is probably what this is referring to, that's still a tricky situation. I mean, there's still, and I'm talking to you as it is. I don't want to sweeten anything, even though I would like to say we're the last beer in the stadium. I mean, I can eat lava. Even though I would like to say that we're that country, we're not. We have a huge potential. So what is going on right now with the train, the transseismic is what it's called, a transseismic, because it is connecting both sides of the South Peninsula. And that is supposed to be something that would compete with the Panama Canal and make it easier for companies or for the world in general to go from one side of the continent to the other. That is a great idea. But the Panama Canal has been in place and working for decades now. The amount of cargo that crosses through the Panama Canal is so huge that the current infrastructure that is being built for this transseismic train is not enough to cover probably 15% of the current volume that is being transported in the Panama Canal. So we can get there eventually if things are done correctly. So, and this is a story that is just starting. So it is a good opportunity, it is a good idea, but we're not there yet. I don't want to sell something. I don't like to oversell. I don't like to sell something that it's not going to happen. I wouldn't attract a company saying, hey, you're going to be able to use our transseismic train instead of going through the Panama Canal, and it comes down to a situation in which that's not going to happen, at least for the next decade or so, or more, or maybe more. So anyway, it is a good thing. It is a positive project. It has to prove itself, has to still prove itself.
So you think that it'll be closer to 2030, end of the decade, that this is going to come online and start to really assist with the shipping?
I would put it this way. I hope I'm still alive to see it.
Oh wow. Okay. Fascinating. And kind of on a similar subject is the Pan American Highway that, from Argentina down. I think there's like I can't remember the exact number, but something, please don't quote me, guys, 400 kilometers that was never finished. And then now they're finally finishing it for the first time. Do you see that assisting as well? Because anything that hops on the Pan American Highway has to go through Mexico, right? Do you see that as, also assisting with the growth of Latin America? Because from my perspective, anything that helps Latin America right now is going to help Mexico by default, because they're the middleman between that and North America, right? The way that goes.
Correct. For that to happen, it needs, this is, I heard a phrase from a good friend. He's an executive in an Indian company. He's an Indian himself. And in his own way of saying it, the Indian way of talking English. So he said it this way. He said, it's all about volume. It's all about volume. I don't know there's enough volume in products in South America. And by South America, I mean Colombia and down. The small portion where Panama is, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and other countries in that part of the world, that's Central America. And at least in my understanding, from Mexico to the north, that's North America. So talking precisely about South America, I don't know there's still enough demand on products and services, well, probably services, but products being manufactured or developed in South America for it to make sense to create a big connection between all the continents. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there is a lot of products and services, from products and goods being shipped to Mexico, the US, and Canada from South America. But it's not even close to the amount of goods that is being exported and imported only between Mexico and the US. So Mexico is right now US number one commercial partner, even above China, even above Canada. So for that to make sense. Now, the Pan American road right now, at least in my understanding, is not one of the main channels of conducting of the shipping of goods and services. Probably among throughout South America, yes, but not really for the north. If you want to go to the north, it's going to probably be through the sea in a ship, not really on the road. Sending products from Argentina, for instance, all the way to the US, it would take forever. And it would probably be very cost expensive. You have to cross I don't know how many countries. It's not really easy for that. And I was involved in a company that had that wanted to establish an operation, or not an operation, a market, to open market in Argentina and in Canada. I mean, in Canada, in Brazil, and it was very difficult. Very difficult. They had to partner with local companies because they were so protective of their own market, of their own companies, um, and so it was very difficult at the time for them to get into that market and compete. Chile was easier to develop as a market, but Brazil and Argentina are were at least at that point very difficult to deal with, in the importation of products. Because if you're going to buy products from a country, you expect that country to accept your products as well.
And are you seeing specific industries are becoming more important than others from, what you, so like one industrial park that you guys have put together, or you guys are also putting on the market here and developing, are you seeing maybe more industries than others?
Yes, you see, there are many industries among the ones that are being attracted to this side of the world. Mexico has a very strong automotive industry, and that is still happening. Now it's happening with electric vehicles. It's happening with Chinese automotive companies that are looking at a market in Mexico, and also a trampoline to go to other latitudes like the US, probably. Maybe that's a big maybe, or even Central and South America. So the automotive industry is very important here in the country. The microchips is starting to be more important because, as you know, right now that is being handled mainly by countries like China and Taiwan and
Korea,
yeah,
South
yeah,
Korea.
exactly. So those, even though, for instance, Taiwan, that's a big question mark in the eyes of the U.S. because you never know what could happen. Hopefully, it doesn't, but could. So they're trying to get that industry into the U.S. And probably having part of that supply chain in Mexico, which is already happening. NVIDIA announced recently a new facility through Foxconn, which is a Taiwanese company as well, in Mexico, to start manufacturing microchips here in Guadalajara. So that's just one. But that, for instance, here in Guadalajara, there's companies like Intel, HP, HPE, IBM. Um, I don't know. Many other companies of that nature are established here, specifically in Guadalajara. So the electronic industry is also big here in Mexico. I would say those two are the most representative. I mean, of course there's many on the other industries like the furniture industry. That's a good and strong industry. Clothing industry, even though we don't get a lot of manufacturing from the outside, it is a strong industry in the country, and it does a lot of exportation. There's a lot of those. Now, if you're asking me what's getting bigger attention, is anything that is within the automotive industry, which is huge. I mean, when you hear automotive, you imagine the wheels and the doors and the knobs and things like that. But there's a ton of other products part of the automotive industry that you probably don't see when you get into a car. So that is very, very important. Chassis and stuff like that. And throughout the northern part of the Mexico border, of the Mexico-U.S. border, there is tons of infrastructure and factories of products that are partially manufactured in Mexico. You see, because of USMCA now and NAFTA before, there is a model that has been copied in other countries in which a product or a partial product can be sent from one side of the border to another several times to be processed and transformed in different ways. And that happens in the US-Mexico border several times for billions of dollars a day, every day, all year long. Tijuana, which is a city in the northwest part, it's border with San Diego in California. Tijuana is the busiest border in the world. The busiest border in the world. The border between Laredo, Mexico, New Laredo, Mexico, and Laredo, Texas, is the busiest commercial border in the world. So you can imagine the size of the business that is being done daily between Mexico and the US.
And this is happening where they send the same product back and forth. Why? Like, it's just cheaper for them to. So, for example, the company I exited earlier this year, we had a contract with, again, for privacy's sake, I won't share it, but a company that does a lot of aluminum products and they would get the smaller pieces, like, I don't know, just parts of the car. And that's the only thing that and large companies, right? They would manufacture the aluminum from that and then ship that single piece into the manufacturer and then have them finalize the car itself and whatnot. Is that because of trading is cheaper, or like, I don't understand how it would be cheaper for such logistics to go back and forth multiple times for a single product, right? Is that labor? Is that taxes? What is that? Do you know?
It is a combination of all of what you mentioned. But let me put you an example. Let me give you, this is a regular calculator, Casio calculator. Okay, you've seen these many, many times. This is just an example. I'm not saying this actually is being manufactured like this, but let's say that you manufacture, you make a partial process of this calculator here in Mexico. So you import the buttons from somewhere. It could be China, could be other country. So you import this, and they ship you the case. Okay, so you get it into your facility, and you actually put the buttons on the calculator, and then you send it back to the US. And then let's say they will probably put some color in it afterwards. Just imagine that's the process. Or they put the screen on it, or they actually put it together as it is. So that process can be going up and down, and it's partially because of how the USMCA now, NAFTA before, has been established between the countries. So every time this crosses, it doesn't pay tax because it's what we call a temporary importation. So as long as this is not sold here in Mexico, after we put the buttons in, so it doesn't pay any taxes. Okay, but it does create jobs. It creates, because when the company puts the button in, they charge for that. Of course, they pay employees for that work. they have different things around that. So that creates an economy, a full economy. So that is a model that works very well and has been working very well for decades now.
Okay, so that makes sense. It kind of just clicked in my mind as a puzzle piece. That makes sense. With NAFTA being able to do temporary importation, it's kind of the equivalent because there's no extra cost other than logistics. It's the same as making it all in one place, having your own in-house manufacturing, except all you have to do is do some logistics. I have a fly, sorry, that has been bugging me. Just won't leave me alone. I think it's the light. Anyway, okay. That makes a ton of sense to me. And are you seeing that also increase as of now? So one thing that's very obvious, right? And I always think it's a disservice to stay on brand, but totally ignore the fact that the world is on fire, right? Like, I don't think that helps anybody. That doesn't help investments. That doesn't help business. It definitely doesn't help the viewers. So I think it's very obvious the Mexico border is a huge subject right now. But I think that affects business and investment more than maybe people realize, right? The political climate. Nobody thinks everything in the world is normal, right? Like, everybody knows it's a little crazy right now. The recent Mexico election, right? How do you see that affecting things going forward? I think you said there was a little bit of tension between parties.
Well, not a little bit, a lot. Yeah, you see, this year, I don't know if everybody. Well, I know the U.S. I mean, we're a few days away from the U.S. election, but this year only, around 74 elections were held around the world. Presidential elections, including many, yeah, around the world. So Mexico and the U.S. are not the only ones who held elections this year. So that only creates uncertainty on each country, on each market, in the surroundings, in the geopolitical, aspect of it. So yes, as you said, there is a bunch of things going on around the world. There's a lot of fires that need to be taken care of. Between political situations, between wars, and a lot of things are going now. The political situation in any country influences any investment process, because what an investor wants, the worst thing you can do to an investor is give him uncertainty. An investor wants certainty on their investments. So if you go to Wall Street and invest your money, you're going to do your analysis. Okay, I'm going to put money on this stock, and I'm going to put money on this stock, and I'm going to make my analysis to see if this is going to be something in which I can get an ROI on it, etc. In the stock market, you can partially predict, even though it's never 100%, never, and it's a high-risk investment, you can partially predict if you're a good analyst and you know how to read stocks and stuff. You have people like Warren Buffett, who probably he's a time traveler and he can go, ahead in time and see what's going on and then come back and make his investments. In politics, there's no way to know. And history has proven that to us. So that is always a variable of uncertainty for any investor. Before getting into the detail on Mexico, there is a positive side on investors that are real investors looking for the long term. I recently I had a conversation. I interviewed the CEO of Grupo Aeroportuario del Pacífico, GAP. They are the owners, quote unquote, because they don't really own them. They have a concession for 50 years for 12 airports in Mexico. There are other groups that have the concession for other airports in the country. But this is the largest airport administrator in the country. These guys, as you can imagine, their investments are huge investments. Only between 2019 and 2026, they're going to be investing in all of their airports around 30,000 million pesos. But that's not the important part. The most important part is that probably 70% of that is being invested in the Guadalajara airport. And what he was telling me about uncertainty and about geopolitical situations and about everything that's going on is that their investments are always in the long term. Okay, so they know their investments are going to be for 40, 50 years. So that is the only way which an investor can handle all of this. Because if you look at it, in 40, 50 years, there's a lot of things that can happen. But not even the worst wars in the world have lasted 50 years. None of them. So if you think of it that way, investors will really look into long term, and it wouldn't matter, probably all the time, almost all the time. It wouldn't matter what's going on political wise or geopolitical wise. Now, looking at the Mexican political situation, that is part of something that it's been happening throughout the whole world, not only here, because you have the US as a good example. You've been dealing with Trump now for almost 8 years, even though he's not in office right now, and that the US might get him again. That's part of that effect that's happening. Milei in Argentina, it's another proof of that. Lula in Brazil, he's returning. The return of Lula, that's part of it. What's going on in other countries, in Colombia, even in countries like France, even in countries like European countries. El Salvador, yes. Bukele, of course, and stuff like that. That is something that is going on worldwide. This is a phenomenon that is going worldwide, and that creates division. And you will, I mean, in this matter, you're gonna be having division for a long time, and division creates tension, and tension creates uncertainty again. So it is a tricky time for investors, but if you set yourself on the ground, or if you look at it at 30,000 feet from the ground, and then you set yourself on the ground, you will be able to identify the way to go if you put yourself some earbuds and stop all the noise around. Because I know for a fact that there are companies that have been establishing here in Mexico. Between all this mess happening, between all this political situation going on, and the rest of the world on fire, they're still investing and doing huge investments here in the country and moving towards that. So I'm still optimistic. I'm very optimistic of the opportunity. I think this market has still a lot to give. and there's a lot to be learned about it yet. The rest is a lot of politics. There's a bunch of things being said between the countries, and I don't like you, and then the other guy does this, and then the other guy does this, and then the other, it's and they're in election time. It's election time, so you can play around the world with this. Mexico has, yeah, with Spain, with the U.S., with Canada, with Colombia, or any other, or the country that you choose.
But it sounds like you're saying that there's a worldwide shift away from globalism and more towards nationalism. I think nationalism has a bad reputation. I don't think there's anything wrong with patriotism and loving your country or nationalism. I do think that there are a lot of things wrong with fascism, socialism, and communism. I'll just throw that out there. But nationalism, a love of one's country, I don't think there is, or a preference for one's country in terms of labor, wages, and so on. And it sounds like that's what you're describing here. Is there's a really big worldwide movement towards more of a nationalism side of things. Right, with Argentina, of course, El Salvador as well. Obviously, Trump's favorite word is tariffs, whether it's good or bad. He just won't stop talking about it. What do you see in terms of these industries? A lot of what you're describing, macro, right? So a rising tide lifts all boats, and it's very obvious that the tide is rising in Mexico dramatically, and the greater Latin American continents areas, right, is really rising. So if you're thinking long term, that tide is going to rise up. Maybe, most people think a little too short term, but I think that's what you were describing. In terms of the American economy, is a service-based economy. It's not really manufacturing anymore. It used to be products. A lot of Mexico is taking on that manufacturing role of the Western Hemisphere of what we talked about. But for me, my background of systems, process, and efficiency management, I'm really good at looking at established processes and building efficiency off of that. So like buying businesses. In America, what this looks like is a lot of trades, a lot of service-based businesses. Do you see that as well as a huge opportunity within Mexico? Like, what is the demand, let's say, for a plumbing company or, a service-based business along those lines? Do you see a demand there if someone wanted to invest or buy one of those type of companies?
Yes. Yes, but you would have to make a good analysis on how that specific company would have been performing, and the market, the way that company has been attending and servicing its own market. I want to go one step back on what you were mentioning about the nationalism, because everything that you're saying, I mean, it's totally correct. It is a wave, a worldwide wave that has been developing for the past few years. I don't think that is going to completely, get in place in the whole world. I was talking to Peter Goodman a few weeks ago. He is global correspondent of economy and technology for the New York Times, and he's been investing a lot of his time in understanding everything that has been going on around the world, supply chains and the different shifts that have been going on. And I asked him directly, do you think globalization is over? And he said, no, globalization is not over, but it's starting to shift towards regions. So you're starting to have regions, or a regionalization of the world economy. So it makes sense that we have, like, for instance, a region within Mexico, US, and Canada. There's another region in South America. There's another region in Europe. There's another region in Asia, which is currently working like that right now. And but still, I mean, we are so connected. As the world is so connected that it's very difficult. If a company needs one service, a specific service, I don't want to mention one in specific, that company can actually reach out to a company that offers that service in Mexico, a company that offers that service in the US, another company that offers that service in Japan, another one in India, another one in China, another one in Russia, another one anywhere in the world, and decide who they want to work with based on their needs, based on the performance of that company, and based on the results and obviously the cost. So now your market is the world, and you can decide which direction to go. Now, if you're deciding on manufacturing processes, on manufacturing or supply chain or things like that, then you can start looking within your country or within your region. So it's going to be a combination of things that it will. I mean, it's already happening, but it will probably get more elaborated, and you might get stuff from one region of the world, and then manufacturing from another region of the world, and then being sold in another region of the world. So that is a process that will probably be more detailed, or it will be more elaborated in the years to come. So, to answer your question, again, this is something that I don't think is going to be a dramatic change. It's going to be something that it's going to be shifting from one way to the other and moving towards different directions until it finds itself in a finished product, if you will, of that specific idea. I don't know if I make myself clear, but this is something that it's moving along. I mean, it's very difficult right now for any country to exiliate itself and start doing anything on their own. That's something that populism tends to do. Like Trump wants to make everything in the U.S. There's no way he can accomplish that. He says he's gonna charge 200% tariffs on any car that it's being manufactured in Mexico and sold in the U.S. Well, good luck talking to General Motors, Chrysler, Ford, Mazda, Toyota, and many other brands that are already manufactured in Mexico and sell their cars in the U.S. There's no way a U.S. citizen will be able to pay twice the price of a car only because it's manufactured 100% in the U.S. There's no way that's going to be happening. And there's many other industries that will be hurt if that actually is tried or he tries to do it.
I agree. It's not even possible if we brought the manufacturing base that we used to have. I think it was like at one point, like 38% of the world or 45% of the world's manufacturing. The inflation would skyrocket to a degree. If no other changes happened, inflation would skyrocket alone because the velocity would increase, right? The amount of times money changes hands, it would be crazy. Anyway, the episode that you're talking about.
I'm sorry, one more fact.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, until a few years ago, 51% of the industrial space absorption was made by U.S. companies. 51% of the industrial space, the absorption was made by U.S. companies. Now that has come down to 36%. The balance has been taken mainly by Asian companies.
Wow. That's a very rapid change. That's a lot, right? And we are seeing this shift. The episode of Mexico Talks that was mentioned was episode 6 with Peter Goodman. I do recommend going to listen to that. That's one of the episodes that I dove into as well, because of this subject is. I think this subject affects people, right? So right now, everybody in America specifically, or Japan for that matter, everybody's thinking I can't afford groceries, right? So they're thinking about like tomorrow or diapers, But I do think when you zoom out, exactly what you said earlier, and you come to the 30,000-foot view, looking down on your these changes affect us a lot more than we realize. In the coming years and decades. I think these shifts, if you look throughout history, there are slow incremental changes followed by rapid reformations. And I could name the amount of time. This happens every single time, basically, right? So even in America, a good example of this would be, Woodrow Wilson, right? Made a rapid change of the U.S. economy with the development of the Federal Reserve System being put in place, right? And then there was a world order that was in place up until Bretton Woods. And then the Bretton Woods Agreement, now you have this rapid change, and then it settles in, and then there's slow change, and then rapid change, and then settles in, slow, incremental, and then rapid. And I don't know if we're necessarily going into a phase of rapid change, but what things look like after that comes is going to be very different. And then you'll settle back in the way it always does, right? Like you said, no war lasts for 40 years, 50 years, right? It's just a matter of trying to find out and see where, which is why I'm so fascinated in this. Where is these big changes and rapid changes taking us? One thing I've noticed, also here in Japan, so Okinawa is a small island. It's very thin, but it's very long. Instead of building a train, so down south, they have a monorail that goes all around the main city of Naha. But instead of building the train all the way up north, which is what I do recommend that they had done, but they're not, they're building another airport, and they just announced this up in the north. And you had mentioned Gap is putting in, they're investing in 12 different airports in Mexico. Why is there a trend towards airports rather than the transport of trains? Do you any idea? Is it because they all operate with no profit and they have to be subsidized?
Well, you see, the train is it's a very different kind of transportation. And when I like to think of infrastructure, not really of a specific kind of transportation system. So you get roads, you get train, you get ports, and you have the airports. So the way, in my opinion, this should be expanding is number one, try to connect as much of your own country as possible. So that's something for which the train, I think it's a good idea for specific areas of the country, because you can connect those areas which were not very well connected with, among themselves, and then to the rest of the country. You need to have roads as well, because train is expensive. You need to have a very high volume of goods being transported through a train in order for that to be a good idea for your business. I mean, cost-wise. And that or whatever you transport is so big and so heavy that that's the only way you can transport it. So there is another thing. Now, roads is as important, I would say, because then you can have lighter transport move around, lighter cargo move around the country easier. Takes less time. You can connect as well communities, cities, and companies, etc. And countries in this case with the U.S. and Canada. And then the air cargo. I mean, you have to think of people. I mean, if you start creating, if you start growing your economy, you're gonna need resources from different parts within the country and outside the country. So, let's say, for instance, a city like Guadalajara that has a pretty good sized airport that right now it's being going through a process of a very robust process of transformation. It's not an addition. They're really building a new airport within the same airport. You need to have that connection. For instance, if you're when the BMW plant was being built in San Luis Potosí, which is the central part of the country, or when you started having Ford manufacturing facilities in the central part of the country, or in the another central part of the country that we call Bajío, which is formed by 4 or 5 different states, or when you start having development of production of microchips, for instance, here in Guadalajara, that people will have to be transported in a different way. Probably there's going to be people who will be moving into the country to jumpstart the company or jumpstart the manufacturing facility. There's a lot of interaction between countries, so you're going to have German people, European from any other part of Europe, probably South America, probably most likely the U.S. and Canada, etc. So the whole infrastructure has to grow in order for a country to get all that investment and start growing in their manufacturing or growing in their services. So it's a you have to consider all of them. You cannot say, okay, I'm going to invest only in trains. For some people, trains are a good idea. For others, they're not such a great idea. But the best thing is to have a way to communicate among different regions of the country. In this case, there's a project right now being analyzed between Nuevo León, which is the state where Monterrey is in the northeast part of the country, between Nuevo León and Texas, to have a train that connects Monterrey and I don't remember if it's Austin or San Antonio or which city in Texas. That would be a good option, because there is a huge interchange between Nuevo León and Texas, and you regionalize all that area, all that region. So depending on what your needs are, I think you cannot be exclusive. You need to think about what's best for what you're looking for.
So as you were talking about this, that's wild to me. So you had mentioned BMW's manufacturing plant, which kind of made me just think. I think everyone knows that GM, Chrysler, and Ford built factories down in Mexico. So as you were saying that, I just wanted to do a quick Google here. How many official manufacturing plants are there within Mexico? How many just cars, one industry, just cars? 42. There are 42 companies, not manufacturing plants. There are significantly more than that. 42 companies already make and have been for quite a few years, and 400 models of cars are directly being manufactured, right? So there are other, as you were describing, supporting industries and jobs surrounding these factories, but these are in official capacities of these car companies. 42, right? This is Audi.
Each of those, yes, I'm sorry, Audi, BMW, Mazda, Toyota, Honda, Ford, Chrysler, GM, etc. But that's only the main brand. Each of those have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 companies that they attract for the whole supply chain.
So this is why I was asking about service-based businesses, is because if the manufacturing base is there, I think this is an unofficial number that I've heard thrown around, but between 3 and 7 supporting jobs go along with factory jobs, right? So you got to think about in terms of Detroit, right? For American minds, right? Detroit, when you had manufacturing of the automobiles there, you also had to have barbershops and restaurants, right? And then retail for clothing because people live there and they need clothes. And you have this like blossoming of an economy from the manufacturing base. So just in that one industry, I just really want that to sink in. 42 car companies are already in an official capacity, which means there's probably between 3 and 7, depending on who you think of, supporting industries and jobs going along with those companies. That's massive. So that's where I think as the tide rises and this progresses, like I said, there's incrementalism and then rapid change. Whenever we get past this fourth turning rapid change, you're going to need all of these additional service bases or retail to support the NVIDIAs coming in with that, or the 400 other companies. So let me ask you this then. Regionally within Mexico, where do you see, and on my notepad here, because I take notes, I'm kind of like actually drawing out Mexico. Where do you see a large industrial base being put together? Or do you see it spread out throughout Mexico?
No, most of the investments are located in very specific regions. I would go from north to south, and you have the border states. That's a huge part of it. And then if you go a little bit south, you're gonna find I would say immediate states that will probably take the place for companies that for some reason they don't find the right location right at the border. But as well, you have a huge amount of population in the central part of the country. So you have Mexico City as the main attractor. Mexico City is the biggest market in the country. It's a city with probably between 23 to 25 million people.
Is it still the most populated city?
I'm not sure because there's Shanghai, which is around 24, 25 million people. So I'm not sure if Mexico City is there, but it's either of those. If you look at the whole metro area, but you have other states there, like what we call Bajío. So the central part of the country, it's a huge chunk of Mexico that does attract a lot of investment. Guadalajara, I mean not Guadalajara, but well, yes, Guadalajara, but Jalisco, the state being part of it, just in the west part of the country, on that portion of the central part of the country. And specifically, Guadalajara, in my opinion, has a very peculiar strategic location because, for instance, Guadalajara, it's only less than 300 kilometers away from the biggest port or the most important port in the country, which is Manzanillo. It's only less than 500 kilometers away from the biggest market in the country, which is Mexico City. is probably 10 hours away from the second largest or most important port in the country, which is Veracruz, and is on the east side of the country and communicates with Europe and other parts of the world. But we also, Guadalajara has direct road connection with the three most important export and import gates to the U.S., which is Laredo, Juarez, and Tijuana. Even Monterrey doesn't have that direct connection with those three cities. Only with Laredo, it does have a direct connection, and it's only 2.5 hours away from that, so that's a very good thing. But if you want to go to the west side of the U.S., and if you come from Guadalajara, you have a direct road coming from Guadalajara to through Tijuana and then San Diego and the rest of California. If you're coming from Monterey, you have to cross the border and get to California within the U.S. from the inside of the U.S., which makes it a longer ride. So even though we're not right at the border, we have a lot to offer as a region. And also, and I believe a very important portion of it, we are very integrated within the central part of the country. So I would say that the central part of the country, going west to east and east to west, and also the northern part of the country, also from east to west and west to east. The south is not really as connected, and that is why the last government and the current government is trying to invest a lot of resources and money and infrastructure in that part of the country so we can reactivate the economy. And it has been working. It does work. But again, it takes time, and all the great ideas will prove themselves, I would say, in the next decade or two.
One of the largest issues that Mexico has had for several years now is networking as a not social networking, but networking in terms of information, internet, high speed, right? Because, when you're talking about manufacturing, you're talking about massive amounts of data that are being sent back and forth, and this is only increasing more. Is there anything being done in terms of the networking in kind of some of these remote areas?
That's a good question, and it is a very good challenge. I would say most of the population in Mexico has internet access. I don't want to throw out a number there, but I would say it's at least 85 to 90% of the population has access to internet. Doesn't mean they have it at home, but they have access to it if they need to. Infrastructure for that also, it's a tricky item because it's usually dominated by one or two players. And that is the situation here. It used to be dominated by a single player, and there's now a bunch of other players in the market, but most of them are regionalized, and the most important player in the market is still dominating the market as a whole. But still, there is infrastructure available. I was talking about Bajío, which is a specific region in the central part of the country, and there's a state called Querétaro, and its capital city, which is also called Querétaro. It's like New York, New York. This is Querétaro, Querétaro. All right, so Querétaro has been housing a lot of data centers from different companies. It recently announced a huge investment from AWS, from Amazon Web Services, which is establishing a huge data center there in Querétaro. So I would say we're not where other countries are, like the US, for instance, but I don't think we're that far. So in main cities, you won't have a situation to get anything you need technology-wise. Obviously, if you go to remote areas, it's going to be a little bit trickier, but again, I think it's advancing.
Do you see Starlink being a big player in that way? So, for example, historically, what you saw in Africa is they skipped a lot of the infrastructure, right? They instead of spending the money for landlines, they just went to cellular service, right? And 5G, or excuse me, 4G, 3G, rather quickly. And you saw that. And then what's the point of a landline if you have 5G, whatever, right? Wireless access, and you have, capabilities through that. Now you get the diversification in the whole telecom industry. This is all throughout Africa. This isn't even necessarily one country. And now you're seeing them adopt cryptocurrencies massively quick as well. So, in other words, they went from, right, unindustrialized to cryptocurrencies decentralized and skipped all the other middle ground, meaning they saved the money on the infrastructure that they never even needed to spend the way America had to spend it, China, India, Mexico. Do you see somebody trying to compete with them, or maybe Starlink, helping and assisting with that in those remote areas?
Well, there's two ways of learning. One is the intelligent way, which is by your own experience, and the other one is the wise way, which is by the experience of others. So Africa chose to learn the wise way. Why go through all the process if we see what the end result is? So, through that point of view, that was a good thing. I would have my reserves with 5G, because that is not. I mean, even though it can get you a quick access, it's not the best access. Starlink is a great idea, but I don't think it's cost available or cost effective for some regions of the world, and that is probably something that will eventually be a different kind of service. Right now, the only player is Elon Musk, of course, and Starlink. But I hope that there's others that start, doing the same and trying to, and that eventually is the general, because there's no point in building antennas all over the country when you have a huge space that you can use for this. Now, that is not a cheap thing to do, and there's other kind of infrastructure that you need. But in a way, I think that's the direction we're going to be going. Answering your question for Mexico, that would be an excellent idea. But again, who's going to do it? Elon Musk right now. I mean, Starlink is out there. It's not the greatest service. If you're out there in the woods and you have nothing but a cabin and no cables around and no cell service, etc., it's a great tool. You're probably going to have a hard time watching Netflix if you want to do that, but you can chat, you can send emails, you can communicate yourself, and it's going to work. If you need something more robust, I think there's a lot of there's some time to still spend in developing the product to be more cost effective and a better product so we can service those communities in those areas.
Yeah, I would see it only maybe small businesses or personal homes. I don't really see it. I think even for one industrial park that you guys are doing, that might be little too much, right? Not enough bandwidth. So you had mentioned this data center that AWS is investing in. I mean, AWS is, it depends who you ask, but between 20 to 35% of the entire internet. So that is going to be a massive data center. Do you know what the timeline is of that?
I believe I believe that's gonna. I'm, I'm not sure if it's already working or it's about to start. But that is already something going on. I mean, the investment, the construction, everything that is already a reality.
Wow, I hadn't heard anything. I'm writing that down. I haven't heard that at all. Anything about that. I think AWS has stayed under the radar, considering the fact that they're, again, 20 to 35% of the entire internet. They've done pretty good at being under the radar.
Yeah, they target very specific clients, and I mean, you and I can use their servers for a website if we want to, etc. So that's a different market, but I agree with you that they're not really as out there as other companies probably.
Sweet. One thing I wanted to pivot here, and I know we're running a little short on time, so I want to thank you for the time you've given me here. But I do want to ask at least a little bit on about the. So we had mentioned the kind of the worldwide trend towards nationalism, kind of away from globalism. But in terms of Americans and maybe people in North America have a perspective on Latin America that I think is deliberate and is also quickly becoming outdated, maybe. Not to downplay, but in terms of the political environment and in terms of maybe violence or cartel situation, like how do you see that? One thing Sean shared with me is just stay out of their way, do your own thing, and it's way more overblown. Like it, if that makes any sense, then people kind of share. That a lot of people that move down to Mexico feel safer than they do in the U.S. or North America as a whole. Are you seeing that too? I mean, I could imagine he's not alone in that.
Well, yes and no. There are regions of the country where I would emphatically tell you not to go. There are other regions in which you will probably don't even don't even see anything happening around it. Um, I agree that media sometimes overblows just what happens right now. I mean, you cannot really deny what Mexico is going through with in regards to that to the cartels and the drugs and etc. That is a very complex topic, and if you look at big cities and some medium-sized cities, you're going to probably be okay. There are some regions in the country in which cartels actually dominate, and their presence is well known, is well perceived. Not well perceived that they accept it, that people accept it, but they know they're there. And probably there, if you live in a community like that, it's a good idea not to mess with them and just stay away from them. But you cannot deny that there is a situation in the country. Now, I do agree with Sean in the fact that there are dangerous areas, dangerous cities, or dangerous areas within a city, probably in every country in the world. You have drug cartels here. You have Chinese mafia in China. You have La Cosa Nostra in Italy, and you have gangs in the U.S. And you know, there's there's danger everywhere probably. And if you start looking for danger, you're gonna find it. So you probably want to look another way and try to move yourself around safer areas. Um, but again, we cannot deny the fact that we do have an issue. I know for a fact that the government is working on it. Hopefully, they're going to do a better job than the last administration. I think they will, um, because of how what the big opportunity as a country we have, and they definitely want to take a chunk of that opportunity. So in order to do that, they need to do something about security. But right now, for instance, I mean, Sean lives in the beach. He lives in a nice community where there's a lot of American, Canadian, and European people living. And of course, that's a protected environment. If you go to a city like Culiacan, well, probably you're going to realize you're not safe there right now. That's probably going to pass eventually, somehow, some way, someday. When is that going to happen? How is that going to happen? We don't know, but it's going to eventually going to pass.
Do you see this? So the more and more, there's just no way to avoid this. And this is one of those areas that if you want to say pass, feel free. But the more and more Mexico and America become tied, right? Tied together in partnerships in business. The more and more it becomes a national security implication to have certain things either stop, go away, or change and evolve. Do you see the way El Salvador handled their situation? Anything remotely like that happening within Mexico?
I don't think so. I don't think the current government has um, the courage. I was going to explain it in a different way, but I don't think the government has the courage to do something even close to that. And you get into a very tricky topic as well, like is the human rights, and because some people may think that Bukele exceeded himself with what he did in El Salvador. The people from El Salvador are very happy in what he did in El Salvador. So if you talk to people in the regions that I was telling you about in Mexico that might be having a difficult situation because of what is going on with cartels, etc., I would probably want to guess that they would accept that kind of policy. If you go to a city like, I don't know, Cancun, or the areas where Sean lives, I don't think people would accept that. So it's really how you look into it. Um, I don't think it's going to happen in Mexico. I mean, at least in the way El Salvador has done it. I hope we do more than we've been doing. That is a fact, and force has to be used. Unfortunately, because the other guys are using force, so you have to use force in an intelligent way. You need to be intelligent. You don't just drop bombs and kill and have collateral damage. You need to do it in an intelligent way, and I hope this administration has the ability to do it. But I agree with you as well that we are neighbors of the biggest market in the world. They also have their own agenda. We can't be naive. The US also has its own agenda, its own interests that definitely include Mexico, one way or the other. So there's going to have to be a way in which we need to get to a middle ground and work together. Because, I mean, drugs, the biggest market in the world is the US, also for drugs. Um, the cartels get the guns from the US. Somebody's selling those guns.
And quite often, unfortunately, whether people want to address it or not, or they want to pretend like it's not happening or not, quite a lot of those guns aren't just coming from gun runners, they're coming from the US government, which is not good. And we have proof of that. Fast and Furious is just one example of that. And I think people want to pretend like that's not happening. So I think in terms of, drugs, we have a supply, we have a consumer problem. America wants too many. And I think smart people are feeding the supply because there are people who have demand. And I think the same thing goes vice versa for the weapons. And I think way too many Americans, and I will only speak for Americans because I am American and I have the right to. I think way too many Americans want to blame the current situation on Mexico or corruption, while totally ignoring the fact that a lot of those weapons provably have come from the U.S. government.
Yeah, and immigration. Now, and those are punching bags. Depending on the political situation and the time we're living politically wise, those are punching bags. So you talk about drugs, you talk about immigration, you talk about violence, you talk about everything. Those are tools for politicians to use whenever they have a specific agenda to accomplish. And that's unfortunate because, it's people and it's lives in the middle. And you see, but that's why I think it is a very, very complex topic. Each country will probably defend its position. We need to accept that we are the crossing way for the U.S. We need to accept that we have not been doing the right thing to stop it or minimize that situation. The U.S. has to accept that they need to do something in regards to not be the main market for drugs in the world. They need to accept that somehow guns are moving from the U.S. to Mexico and feeding these cartels, which makes it even harder to fight them. So there's a lot to accept here, and hopefully they'll find a middle ground to work and help on this, because I haven't seen it because I haven't traveled to those cities, but I've seen pictures, I've seen videos, and people, friends who have been in those cities are telling me that it's very, very, very sad to see cities like LA, Seattle, San Francisco, and others with this very sad situation on drugs.
And I do, yeah, in Nashville as well. That's where I live in the States, is Middle Tennessee area. And just the change that's taken place, right? So Nissan's North American headquarters is in Nashville, just outside in Franklin. And you see this change happening there too. And it's not nearly as predominant. It's not nearly as obvious, but you are seeing this happen nationwide. And I think slowly but surely, like I said, incremental change and then rapid adjustments. And I think we're seeing people realizing that there are rapid adjustments coming, right? And that's part of the reason why this rebranding and this show, I just felt it was time. I have prevented myself for far too long from doing different things. But thank you so much. Do you have anything as a final words or anything you want to tell business owners or anybody that might be kind of on the fence for investing? Do you have a final words on that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I would invite them to look into Mexico, because even though, as many other countries, we have our challenges, Mexico has been historically called the Horn of Abundance. If you look the shape of the country, it's like a horn. And it is called that way because there's a lot of natural resources, and there's a lot of things that the earth in Mexico, that the soil, the country itself, the territory as a whole has to offer. And that is the reason that probably part of the country is not as developed, because there's a lot that the Mother Earth, if you will, gives to those people. But at the same time, we're geographically, strategically positioned. And I think that there is more positive than negative. Mexico has turned into a country, if you will, because we're not, different spots of industrial development. We are now converting into regions, and we're now part of a bigger region. So I think the opportunity is very, very good. I would really, really invite investors to look into the country, even if you're a non-institutional investor. If you want to look into, I know Sean promotes a lot to those investors, but you see, there's different markets in which those investors can also look into, which like the industrial market. And even though there's a ton of things going on around the world, that the wheel is still moving, and I haven't seen the wheel stopped, even on COVID, even during COVID. If any, the wheel started moving faster in COVID. So I would say that it is worth the time to look into the country. And so you, like in 10, 15, 20 years, you don't repent yourself that you didn't took this wave.
Thank you so much for hopping on here with me. And I would also recommend people really start to pay attention to what's happening in Mexico as well as the greater Latin American area, because it's not casual and it has direct implications for the American market. So thank you again for hopping on with me here.
No problem. Thank you, Quinton.